armor, firepower, mobility. In the world of tank design, we call this the iron triangle. Every engineer dreams of perfecting all three. But in reality, it's a brutal game of trade-offs. If you want a bigger gun, you lose speed. If you want more speed, you lose protection. But what happens when the protection fails? Today we're looking at the evolution of the shield. From the thin steel plates of World War I that could barely stop a rifle round, to the modern, high-tech sandwiches of ceramic and polymer that can withstand jets of white-hot molten metal. The armor of a tank today is a totally different creature than it was 100 years ago, and the story of how we got here is written in battle damage, desperate field modifications, and some of the most expensive engineering projects in human history. Let's go back to the beginning. 1916. The original specification for a tank wasn't to fight other tanks, it was to be a machine gun destroyer. The goal was simple: get across no man's land, flatten the barbed wire, and allow the infantry to clear the trenches. To do that, you only needed enough protection to stop small arms fire. Take the British Mark II. It carried between 8 and 12 millimeters of hardened steel. To us today, that sounds like nothing, but at the time, it was revolutionary. However, there was a catch. Early in the war, the British were so desperate for tanks that they sent training vehicles to the front lines. These were made of boilerplate, unhardened steel. If you look at the surviving Mark IIs today, you can see the results. You'll find clusters of bullet impacts around the vision ports. The German snipers weren't just shooting, they were searching for weak spots. If you were in a training tank with boilerplate armor, those rounds would eventually find their way through. It didn't take the Germans long to realize they needed a way to punch back. They started with the SMK round, a standard rifle bullet with a tool steel core. When that stopped working against the newer Mark IV tanks, they went to Mauser and asked for something bigger. The result was the Tankgewehr M1918. This was a 13.2 mm single-shot bolt-action rifle. It was essentially a massive elephant gun designed to kill machines. It was heavy, it was clumsy, and the recoil was so savage that it didn't even have a butt plate. It would literally break a man's shoulder if fired incorrectly. I've always called this a suicide weapon. Even if you hit the tank, the odds of doing significant damage were slim, and the moment you fired that single shot, every machine gun on that tank was going to find you. But the real threat wasn't rifles. It was shell fire. 12 millimeters of metal provides zero protection against a field gun. If a shell hit the horn of a Mark II, it would pass clean through one side and out the other. If it hit the center, the petrol tanks and ammunition would go up in a cataclysmic explosion. Tank protection had to evolve, or the tank would become a rolling coffin. By World War II, the iron triangle was being pushed to its limits. Tanks were getting faster, guns were getting bigger, and armor construction was becoming a high-stakes industrial race. There were two main ways to build a hull: casting and welding. Look at the M4A1 Sherman. The whole upper hull is one massive cast component. The advantage? Casting creates a strong, rounded form that's excellent for deflecting rounds. It doesn't have the weak joints you get with rivets or bolts. The disadvantage? It's incredibly expensive and requires master-level skill to get the molds right. On the other side, you had welding. The Sherman Crab is a perfect example. Welding was quicker and easier to scale up for mass production. During the height of the war, when you need thousands of tanks a month, speed wins. In fact, 8 out of the 12 variants of the Sherman used welded hulls. But as the armor grew thicker, the tanks grew heavier. And this is where the Germans fell into a trap. A basic Sherman weighed about 28 tons. A German Tiger I weighed 56 tons. By the end of the war, the Germans were obsessed with ever bigger, ever heavier. They created the Jagdtiger, a 72-ton monster. But here is the nasty truth about heavy armor. Weight kills mobility. The Jagdtiger was so heavy that it was a mechanical nightmare. If it broke down, and it often did, no other vehicle could tow it. Crews were frequently forced to use demolition charges to blow up their own vehicles because they simply couldn't get them off the battlefield. More armor might keep the crew safe from a hit, but if the tank can't move, it's just a stationary target waiting for the inevitable. When the official armor wasn't enough, crews took matters into their own hands. This is what we call up-armoring. You've seen the photos, tanks covered in spare track links, sandbags, logs, and even thick layers of concrete. Some Sherman crews would plaster concrete over the front of their tanks to try and stop German 88mm rounds. Did it work? Honestly, there's very little evidence that sandbags or concrete did anything to stop a high-velocity round. In some cases, it actually made things worse by adding dead weight to the engine. But it stayed because of crew morale. If the men inside felt safer, they fought better. However, some official modifications were genius. Take the Panzer IV. By 1944, it was an old design, but it stayed in the fight because of Schürzen, those thin metal skirts you see hanging off the sides and the turret. This is spaced armor. It isn't meant to stop a tank shell. It was designed to stop Soviet anti-tank rifles. When the rifle round hits that thin outer plate, it deforms, loses its stability, and tumbles. By the time it hits the actual hull of the tank, it has lost all its energy. It's a cheap, lightweight solution to a deadly problem. While the Germans were making tanks heavier, the Soviets were making them smarter. The T-34 changed everything because of one thing: geometry. Until the mid-1930s, tanks were basically big steel boxes. But the T-34's armor was sloped back at 45 degrees. This does two incredible things. First, it increases the chance of a ricochet. Second, it uses basic math to save lives. If you have 100 millimeters of metal and you tilt it at 45 degrees, an incoming shell actually has to pass through 140 millimeters of metal to get inside. You get 40% more protection for free without adding a single pound of weight to the tank. The only downside? It makes the inside of the tank incredibly cramped. But for the Soviet High Command, that was a price they were willing to pay. After World War II, a massive argument broke out among NATO designers. On one side, you had the French and the Germans with the Leopard 1. Their philosophy was, modern anti-tank rounds are so powerful that no amount of armor can stop them. So, don't even try. Make the tank fast and hard to hit. On the other side, the British stuck to their guns. Literally. The Chieftain was built with massive, thick cast steel. The British believed that if you were going to sit on a ridge and trade shots with the Soviet steamroller, you needed to be able to take a hit. In the 1980s, they even started bolting on still brew armor, huge blocks of extra protection, to the front of the Chieftain turrets. It was crude, but it worked. But the real revolution happened in a small lab in Surrey, England. It was called Chobham armor. This is what we find on the Challenger 2 and the M1 Abrams today. It's no longer just a slab of steel, it's a high-tech sandwich. When you look at a modern tank, they look very boxy and angular. That's because composite armor is made of flat tiles of ceramics, polymers, and steel bonded together. Here's how it works. An incoming round hits the outer steel. then hits a layer of ceramic tiles. Those tiles shatter, but in doing so, they dissipate the kinetic energy of the round. It's like a car's crumple zone, but for a kinetic dart traveling at 3,000 meters per second. It's also the ultimate defense against shaped charges. A shaped charge, like an RPG, works by focusing a jet of white-hot molten metal into a single point to burn through armor. But because the ceramic sandwich creates a jagged, irregular hole, that jet can't form properly. The energy is scattered, and the tank survives. Finally, we have the active solutions. If you look at Russian T-72s or T-80s, you'll see they are covered in what looks like small bricks. That's ERA, explosive reactive armor. Inside each box is an explosive charge. When a round hits the box, it explodes outward, pushing a steel plate into the path of the incoming projectile to neutralize it. And for the low-tech threats, we use slat armor or bar armor. You've seen this in Iraq and Afghanistan, metal cages surrounding the vehicle. It looks simple, but it's designed specifically to trap the nose of an RPG. If you're lucky, the bars pinch the fuse of the grenade and stop it from ever exploding. From 12 millimeters of boilerplate to the secret formula of Dorchester composite armor, the story of the tank is a story of adaptation. As long as there are people trying to destroy tanks, there will be engineers finding new ways to keep the crew inside alive, whether it's through better math, better materials, or just bolting on more stuff. The iron triangle continues to evolve. The next time you look at a tank, don't just see a machine of war. See a century of lessons learned the hard way. Under fire. Armor. Firepower. Mobility. The game never ends.